a couple of things, and I'm talking loud because third block needs to be able to hear this, so it's not that you guys can't hear. It's just that they can't hear if I don't talk loud. So that's the reason I'm yelling at you rather than just talking to you. So ignore that, and has nothing to do with my innate anger that I carry with me on a daily basis. So inside your Google Classroom, you should have a Module 10 fill-in notes. If it's not outside of it, it actually should be located in the Module 10 folder. I'd like you to have that open because as we go through stuff today, you're just going to fill it in. So if you were in my class in 8th grade, a lot of that kind of stuff is going to look very, very similar. So I'm going to give you most of it. Understand on those fill-in notes, it is your version of a Google Doc or of a Google slideshow. So if I talk about things that are extra, that aren't just fill-in notes that you think you could use later on, then put those in there too. But there shouldn't necessarily be a whole lot. But you guys know me, most of you at least, know me well enough to know that I'm a storyteller. And I've been digging and digging and digging, trying to find stories to talk about with people from 2,000 years ago that I'm not really that familiar with. Well, not really 2,000 years, but a long, long time ago. So there is a study guide. That's where your homework is. I'll go over the agenda in just a minute, but I believe your homework for Wednesday is to complete the red portion of the study guide. So at least for this one, I took the time to go in and color code everything, and I think there's maybe like 3 vocab and 2. It's in the short answer section, but your answers could be words, not sentences necessarily. So there's only like 5 things, and if you have that study guide open at the same time as you have your fill-in notes open, chances are you can have that homework done before you ever leave my class. That's kind of the goal most days. And then you do have one piece of homework that is located in the syllabus. If you scroll past, if you remember in the syllabus, we went through that Ferris Bueller's Day Off video, and we talked about how we are the creators of history because we document the things that have happened. If you go past that, there's a short activity called periodization of your life. And it's going to ask you to create a list of, I think it's 15 things that you remember. So go back to the very earliest memory that you have from when you were a little teeny tiny pumpkin, all the way up to maybe what you ate for breakfast. It doesn't have to be anything like big, like I got shot in the foot. It doesn't have to be that, though that's probably something that would stand out in your memory if it's happened. I got my first haircut. Well, nobody remembers that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, you try to come up with a list of 15 things, and then on a piece of paper, I want you to create a timeline and put those things on it. You don't have to have specific dates, but you probably kind of remember that you got your first, you got your braces before you had your braces taken off. So you can kind of remember the order that those things go in. Anyway, there's like 4 or 5 slides in that syllabus for periodization of your life that you need to try to follow those directions. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to ask for it. So you're going to create a timeline of the history of your first 16 or 17 years of your life, however old you are. By the way, today is my daughter's birthday, so yay, Taryn. But nobody cares, but that's fine because I do. Anyway, so that is your homework, is to get those 2 things done. The little bit of the study guide, which do it during class, and then the periodization of your life, which I think you're going to have to do outside of class. But I don't expect it to take too long. Like if it's taken you an hour, you're probably doing it wrong. It should be 15 minutes of homework. Unless you just completely can't remember 15 things in your life. And again, maybe that's the case. Maybe some of you have a really good memory from when you were little. Like I went over to Zach's house and I tripped and fell in a hole and they threw rocks at me until I cried. Trevor, do you remember that? Yes, it was horrible, wasn't it? Anyway, so that's what I want you to do today. We've talked it before. Every day you come in, there's going to be that's somebody's emails. There's going to be an agenda that looks like this, and this is the stuff. We start out in Module 10, so that great big fat history book, actually we only do about half of it, not even quite half. In Module 10, the first part of it is called the Mughal Empire. And it's going to talk a lot about the Islamic religion, and it's going to talk, which is Muslim, and it's going to talk a lot about India. Whereas in some other classes, maybe we start in different places. The Mughal Empire, fill in notes for that part of the stuff during class, get that done, periodization of your life, complete that in the red section in Google Classroom. So it's just the stuff, exactly the stuff that we just went over. Any questions about your homework or Google Classroom or where something is or what you need to do? Please, please, please ask for clarification. If I'm talking too fast for you or you don't know what's going on, let's get that fixed now rather than waiting for later.
So where can you find the periodization?
It's like slide maybe 30 in the syllabus. So if you open up that syllabus past the Ferris Bueller stuff, it's like the first set of slides after that. So in that syllabus in Google Classroom, there's probably like 55 slides. There's a whole bunch of different activities. The periodization of your life, does anybody have it?
There's 23 slides. Nothing goes past the final thoughts.
Nothing past the Ferris Bueller?
There is no Ferris Bueller.
Time out. See, I'm glad you asked the question because I'd feel like a tool. Syllabus, lesson plans. Sorry, we're going to add some more stuff here.
Can I go run and grab my Chromebook charger?
Yes, please. For those of you watching the video that are stuck listening to this, you probably need this information too, so we'll figure this out slowly and surely. Why don't I just put it in all of them, just in case? Okay, so it is obviously not located in syllabus. Now, in a second, when this catches up, there will be a document called Intro Periodization of Life, and it's probably like slide 30 or something like that. You can look it up and let me know where we're at on that, if you would, please. If you refresh, that should pop up now. It's awful that an old guy like me can screw up as much as I can screw up.
It's there. What's the class code again?
Class code again is BCIQNYO. Yeah, that's purple 1. So purple 3, that's not your class code, but I think you guys are already in. BCIQNYO. Okay, anybody find the slide number for periodization of life? Slide 40-ish is where it starts, and it probably lasts for 4 or 5 slides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, thank you. I appreciate all of your help getting us crack-a-lack in here. Eventually, we'll be ready to actually have class. Okay, so your fill-in notes should look kind of something sort of like this. The Mughal Empire in India. It is lesson 1 of module 10. I think module 10 has, well, I'll show you in just a minute, but there are 7 lessons. Most of those lessons are going to take about a day. Some of them might take a little bit longer than that. So you could guess that your first test in my class, your first probably real summative assessment, will be about 8 class periods away, which 16 school days since we have class every other day. So we're going to go through the Mughal Empire in India. We'll take a look at exploring the East. The Chinese and the Japanese reject expansion. So they kind of do this thing called isolationism. What does it mean if you isolate yourself? You block yourself off. All of us go through times like that when maybe you've had a rough day at school or at work and you go home and you go to your bedroom and you shut your door and you want everyone to leave you the heck alone. And the more people that bother you or try to talk to you or whatever, it just ticks you off. We isolate ourselves. The Chinese and the Japanese feel like that's a way to protect themselves from the outside world that might be more powerful than them. Spain building an empire, European nations settle in North America, the Atlantic slave trade, Columbian exchange. So the last half of Module 10 is actually stuff that you learned in the 8th and the 9th grade in American history class from a different perspective. So where you talk about things from those European perspectives instead of from the American perspective or the American Indian perspective. So it's just a little bit different, but it's the same stuff. We all have different perspectives, and you should understand perspective. Sometimes you get home after your curfew. Your parents are upset. They don't understand that you have a legit reason for being past your curfew. To them, late is late. To you, late is because you had to drop your friend off, and then you had to stop at your friend's house and talk to your friend's mom, and that took 10 minutes, and you didn't expect it would take that long. There's always excuses, but that's your perspective compared to your mama's perspective. Always a little bit different. So that's the plan, and that's where we're going in the next 7 or 8 lesson periods, depending on how fast I move. There should be plenty of time to get one of these done in each day, but you guys know me, and you know that sometimes I talk more than I should, and I know with 90-minute blocks, I should probably have more time for you to do your stuff. So my goal is to stop early enough that you can at least get part of that periodization of your life stuff done. That's my plan. Okay, so when we talk about the Mughals, you've heard of the Mongols before. I know a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away that when Mr. Legrand was your teacher, he taught you about this tough guy named Ghengis Khan. Do you guys remember Ghengis Khan? He's like one of the baddest dudes to walk the planet, right? If you were on his side, he was a good guy, but if you were against him, what do you think the consequence for being against the Khan was? A lot of times it was death. That's a lot of times in history how powerful rulers will set themselves up. If you're with me, we're moving forward. If you're against me, you're going to get dead. Really, really quickly, and sometimes in a painful, horrific manner. Because I want to make an example of you. That's how Chinggis Khan or Genghis Khan typically worked things out. So these are the descendants of the Khan, descendants of a guy named Timur the Lame and Genghis Khan. When we talk about Timur the Lame, he's kind of an interesting character because he comes after Genghis Khan, but he really, really, really wants to be Genghis Khan. Why is that? Because the guy was a stud, right? Do you think to a certain extent, and maybe this is a horrible connection, but it's an old man connection. Do you think to a certain extent, okay, let's talk professional basketball for a minute and see if we can come up with some consensus. Who is on the court today, who would you say the GOAT is today? Maybe Steph Curry. I think, maybe I'm wrong, but would a lot of people say it's LeBron? The guy's statistics would bear that he's probably the greatest of all time. If you go back to your parents' generation, who is the individual that they would say is the greatest of all time in professional basketball? Michael Jordan. Is it fair to compare the two? Kinda. It's a different time period. Was the style of basketball in the 1980s and 90s different than the style of basketball today in 2024? Basketball guys know the answer. Yes, it is. It's sort of like you guys are juniors, and those of you that play basketball, when your dad's trying to tell you what you're doing right and wrong, your dad a lot of times is wrong because things have changed. You know, I coach wrestling. Wrestling is a lot different today than what it was 30 years ago when I actually participated. So I have to learn and change as time goes on. Do you think, though, that at some point in time, maybe not now, But at some point in time, way back when LeBron James was a rookie, no college, I don't believe the guy had a father. You guys can fix me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff. He had no dad. He had no college. He wasn't a great high school student. And somebody drafted him to play professional basketball and gave him a whole crap ton of money. Do you think at some point during that time, LeBron James hoped he could be Michael Jordan? I think so. Anybody sitting in here that's a basketball player would dream to be as good as either one of those men. So I think that's probably the case. And Timur the Lame, I think that was like his dream was to be the Khan. The Khan is the leader. The Ghengis Khan obviously is a little bit different. So when we look at Ghengis Khan, his original name was Temujin. No wonder he switched to Ghengis. Ghengis sounds a lot tougher than Temujin. But he was in charge for 21 years. That's a pretty long rule. And he crushed all of his rivals, but he took care of all of those that were loyal to him. So if you were good to the Khan, you were his friend. He takes good care of you. If you did anything to tick him off, you end up dead. Now, I like the stuff in history that doesn't make the history books. You guys know this about me, because I think that's the stuff that makes these individuals more unique and interesting than every other goofball leader of every other little country or every other little dynasty that stood out in history. Well, I thought I'd look some stuff up. Over his life, it is believed, secondary sources, so not someone that was connected directly to Genghis Khan, but it is believed that he had over 500 wives. Not all of them would be wives the way we consider wives today or spouses today. Oftentimes they would be called concubines. It's sort of like a wife, but they're not married, but they are pledged to him, like women who have pledged their loyalty to the Khan. So if you can imagine a man that has over 500 wives, this is ridiculous in today's standards. It is believed that Genghis Khan had over 1,000 children. I have 2, and when they were little, they kept me busy all the time. Now neither one of them are ever home. But it's crazy to think, 1,000 kids. I'm going to guess Genghis Khan didn't know very many of them. There were probably women in parts of his empire, and the Khan ruled over a vast, vast empire in parts of his empire that he never traveled back to, like a one-night stand type of thing. So that's crazy to think about that. Also, think about this. It is believed or estimated that Genghis Khan's conquests, so his goal was to spread his empire and make it bigger, all the way from Mongolia in north of China, all the way through India. That's what we're talking about here is in India. Throughout his conquests, Genghis Khan may have been responsible for upwards of 40 million deaths. Did he himself shoot an arrow through 40 million people? No, obviously not. But he gave the orders for those people to be killed. If you're in my way, you're going to be destroyed. That is crazy. Now, just looking at the picture, would you mess with this guy? Like if I had an eagle on my shoulder, riding on a big horse? First of all, you guys probably giggle a little bit because you know if I tried to get on that horse, it would be comical and you'd want to videotape it because that would go viral on the YouTube, just trying to see Mr. Bellamy climb onto that horse. But if I could get up there with this big shiny suit of armor and a hawk sitting on my arm, and I don't know what that little bird is on top of his head. I got attacked by a bird at work a couple of weeks ago. I was doing security at Gene Leahy Mall in downtown Omaha, and I'm just walking along. I was the lead, so I was by myself. Most of the time in security, you have a partner. But I was just checking up on the whole park and making sure one of my guys was where they're supposed to be and that there were no problems. It was a beautiful day. The birds were chirping. The sun was shining. And I'm just walking along as cool as I can, you know. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a freaking bird attacks my head. it's pecking. I was wearing a hat, and it's pecking at that little thing on that little round thing right on the top of. You know what I'm talking about? It's pecking at that. It hits me like 3 times. Like, ah! I'm screaming and waving my hands, and whoever saw it had to think I was nuts. Come to find out later, there were 3 or 4 other of my guards that had been attacked by that same bird, so he must have been territorial. So I guess messing with a little bird isn't something that most people want to do. But this is a bad, bad dude. Now, I'll show you. I've got a video clip here. Oh, sorry. I thought I had a video clip of the Khan from YouTube. It's just a couple of minutes long.
The Chinese was the barbarian scourge born from the wastes. To the Europeans, he was a demonic servant, leading a detestable nation of Satan that poured like devils from Tartarus. To human history, though, he was one of the greatest warlords in history. We're talking, of course, about Ghengis Khan. Ghengis Khan was born sometime around 1162 AD, and originally named Temujin, after a Tartar chief that his father had captured. Ghengis had been born a member of the Borjigin tribe, and was a descendant of the fabled Kabul Khan, who had done what so few Mongols had ever managed to do, unite the many disparate tribes against the Jin dynasty of China 6 decades earlier. Greatness marked Ghengis from birth, not just in the heritage of his mighty bloodline, but physically, with a literal mark caused by a blood clot in his head. To the superstitious Mongols, this meant that Ghengis was destined to become a great leader. Young Ghengis, though, would have a hard education and survival ahead of him, amidst the various clans that made up the Mongol lands. When he was just 9 years old, his father took him to live with the family of his future bride. And on the return trip, his father encountered members of a rival tribe who invited him home with them to share in a conciliatory meal. Believing that the rival tribe members meant to bury the hatchet over past transgressions, Ghengis' father agreed and dined with them, only to be poisoned. When Ghengis learned of his father's death, he immediately returned home to claim his position as clan chief. However, the rest of the clan refused to acknowledge the leadership of a 9-year-old boy, and his family was ostracized, becoming near refugees in their own tribe. Ghengis vowed revenge and to never be laughed at again. So when during a dispute over the spoils of a hunting expedition he quarreled with his half-brother, Ghengis killed him and confirmed his position as the head of his family. The young chieftain was yet a child and had already learned the harsh truths of Mongol life. Power is won by blood spilled, and very often held the same way. At 16 years old, Ghengis married the woman he had long ago been promised to, a young girl by the name of Borte. This marriage cemented the alliance between her tribe and his, but soon after the wedding, Ghengis' wife was kidnapped by a rival tribe and given to their chieftain as a wife. Ghengis, along with his close friend Jamuka and his older protector Tokarul, raided the rival tribe's camp and rescued his bride. However, when she gave birth to a son 9 months later, Jochi, there were doubts about who the real father was, though Ghengis accepted young Jochi as his own, daring any of his rivals to question his judgment. Eventually, Ghengis would have 4 sons with Borte, and though during the course of his rule would take many other wives and have many other children, Borte alone would remain his lifelong companion, and only his male children with her would qualify for succession in the family. Troubles typically precede greatness, though, and at age 20, Ghengis was captured in a raid by a tribe that had formerly been his family's allies, the Taichils. Ghengis was enslaved briefly, though his iron will would prove difficult to break, and he was often punished for refusing to submit. With the help of a sympathetic captor who perhaps still held some loyalty to Ghengis' family, Ghengis was able to escape. His daring escape from captivity fueled Ghengis' reputation, and he formed a fighting unit out of his brothers and some of his most trusted clansmen, believing that his people would never truly become great until they ceased the petty infighting and rivalries between the various clans. Ghengis took his small force out into the steppes and began to unite the clans together one by one. His goal was simple. He would destroy all the divisions between his people, through slaughter if he had to, and the Mongols would at last become one people, a mighty nation to rival the powers of China. Young Ghengis' small force would swell to an elite fighting force of 20,000 battle-hardened warriors. A brilliant tactical mind combined with savage brutality, Ghengis proved an exceptional battlefield commander, and his fighting force met its first true challenge when Ghengis turned his army on the Tartars, who had murdered his father so long ago. Easily defeated, Ghengis then ordered as punishment that every Tartar male who was taller than the axle pin of a wagon wheel be killed. ensuring that only children who could be molded to be obedient to the young Khan would be left alive. With one vengeance satisfied, Genghis turned next to the Taichut, the former family allies who had attempted to enslave him. Relying on an army of expert horsemen, his cavalry easily routed the Taichut forces, and as revenge, Genghis had every single Taichut chief boiled alive. A few years later, he would go on to defeat the powerful Naiman tribe, who stood between Genghis and his ambitions of a unified Mongolia. Their defeat would give the young Genghis control over central and eastern Mongolia, more territory than any Khan had held in centuries. Genghis was a shrewd battlefield commander who combined expert tactical thinking with ruthless brutality. Yet he was also keenly aware of the value of military intelligence. He employed a huge network of spies, which sent out amongst his enemies to learn the strengths and weaknesses of those he faced. Sometimes his spies also acted as assassins, eliminating important rival military commanders and thus weakening the effectiveness of the fighting forces that opposed him. He was also quick to adopt new technologies from those he defeated, and these would include improved bows, which allowed his men to shoot further and more accurately, as well as techniques for quickly relaying messages between his forces. Most famously, Genghis adopted a system of smoke and burning torches to relay long-distance commands, as well as large drums and flags to give signals in the midst of combat. This allowed Genghis to issue commands to his forces even in the midst of battle, making them incredibly mobile and able to respond to an evolving battle, often outmaneuvering an enemy. Genghis's great military successes also relied heavily on the individual expertise of his soldiers. Unlike most ancient commanders, Genghis did not accept just anyone into his fighting forces, and ensured that each man who rode into battle with him was an expert rider who could handle and ride a horse without a saddle. His soldiers had to be expert marksmen with the bow, but also able to fight in close quarters with swords and daggers when needed. Typically, the average Mongol carried a bow, arrows, a shield made of wood or leather, and a lasso. They could also carry javelins, body armor made of hardened leathers, and a lance in order to pull enemies off their own horses. As expert riders, each of Genghis' soldiers could handle their horse with just their legs, leaving their hands free to shoot a bow or wield a lance and shield in combat. Yet, as a keen tactician, Genghis recognized that an army was more than just a fighting man at the front. Thus, his armies were always followed by a very well-organized supply system of ox carts, loaded with supplies and extra military equipment, shamans to provide spiritual leadership, maintain morale and treat the wounded, and even government officials whose job was to catalog the plunder. After his initial victories over the major Mongol tribes, the other tribes unified and agreed to peace, at last bestowing Genghis the title of Khan, or universal ruler, a title of not just political but also spiritual importance. A great shaman declared that Genghis Khan was the living representative of Monke Koko Tengri, or the eternal blue sky, who was the supreme god of the Mongols. With this newfound divine status, it was clear that Genghis' destiny was to rule the world. Genghis immediately led his forces to fresh conquests, striking out in 1207 against the kingdom of Xixia, which had flourished in northwest China since 1000 AD. 2 years later, the kingdom surrendered unconditionally, and Genghis turned his attention against the Jin dynasty in northern China, in an epic struggle that would last for 20 years. Yet, even as he fought for control of China, Genghis' armies also struck out west. He established diplomatic relations with the Khwarezm dynasty, a Turkish empire that included Turkestan, Persia, and Afghanistan. But relations quickly soured when the Mongol diplomatic mission was attacked by the governor of Otrar, a prosperous and important city. When the 450-strong Mongol trade caravan arrived at the city, the governor in Alchuk accused the traders and ambassadors of being Mongol spies, and executed the entire caravan. Genghis Khan then sent a delegation of 3 diplomats to the Khwarezm Sultan, demanding that Inalchuk be punished for the murders, and instead the Sultan beheaded the lead ambassador and shaved the beards of the other 2, sending them back to Genghis with the lead ambassador's head. This would prove to be a mistake. In 1219, Genghis Khan personally led an army of 200,000 Mongols against the Khwarezm dynasty, sweeping through every major city and razing them to the ground. Anybody who wasn't immediately slaughtered was forced to march in front of the army to act as human shields as Genghis laid siege to the next city. Genghis spared no living thing in the empire, killing everything from children to small domestic animals and even livestock. 2 years later, in 1221, the Sultan and his son had been killed, ending the Khwarezm dynasty forever. The invasion of the Khwarezm dynasty brought Genghis Khan and his hordes to Eastern Europe, and began an age known as the Pax Mongolica. Despite being known as a brutal war leader, Genghis Khan was also a great statesman and valued peace and prosperity as much as conquest. His invasions brought order to wide swaths of lands, which had for centuries been ruled by brutal warlords, and his prohibition of blood feuds forced a lasting peace and an end to the petty conflicts which saw constant warfare between clans and villages. Genghis's law also forbade adultery, theft, and false witness, and reflected the Mongols' great respect for the environment, making it the law for people to treat their natural resources with great respect. Decency was made a part of a soldier's life as much as obedience, and soldiers were taught to pick up anything that the soldier they were following dropped. Unity was preached over traditional selfishness, and Genghis's laws helped weave together the many disparate people under his great empire. A stunningly progressive leader for his time, Genghis also outlawed the tradition of earning promotions in either the military or in government solely due to heredity or ethnicity, and instead made it law that only merit would be used to judge the worthiness of a man. In Genghis Khan's empire, a non-Mongol had as much chance to rise in the ranks as a Mongol, and efficiency and competence were valued over social status. Genghis Khan's empire also gave tax exemptions to religious organizations, something that would take centuries to be adopted by Western powers. There was also a great degree of religious tolerance, reflecting the long-held Mongol tradition of religion as a personal conviction free from the law and interference. Genghis Khan even established a mail system, which would see packages and letters safely delivered from as far as Europe, all the way to the coasts of China, a wonder which would not be repeated again for centuries. Genghis Khan would die in 1227 AD, though historians remain unsure as to the exact nature of his death. It is suspected it was either from injury or natural causes. Following Mongol tradition, the grave of the greatest war chief in history was ultimately unadorned, without any great monument. Instead, the funeral party carried the great Khan's body to a secret place and slew any they encountered to ensure that his grave would never be found. It is rumored that they even diverted a river to run over the grave, and thus ensure that Genghis's resting place would never be disturbed. Under the leadership of his sons, the Mongol horde's power would climax as his forces reached all the way to the gates of Vienna in Austria, when the death of his son Ogede forced the horde's commanders to return to Mongolia. Europe was ultimately saved from the great Mongol horde. Though given the incredibly progressive values of Genghis Khan's empire, there's an argument to be made that Europe would have been better served by not being spared from invasion. The great Mongol Empire was ultimately short-lived, but without a doubt, ranks among the greatest in history. What do you think world history would have been like if the Mongol Empire had lasted as long?
What stands out from that video about this guy?
October 25th, 1944, and off the coast of the Philippine island of Leyte.
Time out. What stands out about Ghengis that maybe is interesting? Have you ever heard of such a bad dude that did so many good things? All that good stuff they mention, you know, he slaughters everyone in his path that's ticked him off ever, yet he picks up trash on his way. He takes care of the environment. He is not himself a religious person, but he cares about people's beliefs. All of those things are crazy and stand out as really progressive in history for someone back at that time that had as much power as him. Or just think about the difficulty of transporting an army of 200,000 men. At one point it said that when that group of sultans killed his men, he took an army of 200,000 men to avenge their death, and they killed everything in the city. Men, women, children, and animals. But think about 200,000 men. And we talked about this in the 8th grade when Robert E. Lee or Ulysses Grant had an army of 70,000. One of the biggest issues they had was, how do you supply that army every time they move? How do you supply an army the size of the population of Omaha as it's moving across hundreds of miles of territory? Just like William Tecumseh Sherman in his march to the sea in the American Civil War. Sure, you shoot the deer along the way and you eat everything in your path, whether it's deer or pigs or cows or whatever it might be. But that is tremendous. And for the time, teaching all of his men to be able to ride their horses without saddles so that they could shoot bows and arrows, everything about Genghis Khan is is transitional. It's changing, and we don't see that again for several hundred more years. The fact that the guy takes over or tries to take over when he's 9 years old. Think about for a minute how powerless you were at 9 years old. Think about what your dreams were at 9 years old. It certainly wasn't to run an empire and to kill all of your enemies. At least I don't think so. It was probably more like, I want to go home and play Minecraft. You know, at 9, we're pretty simple. And actually, the expectations that your parents had of you when you're 9 were pretty simple. Maybe you had a few chores, like feed the dog and take out the trash. Some of you had no chores. Some of you had trouble getting out of bed. But anyway, the Mughals or the Mongols carry on this tradition with other leaders. You know, the Muslims and the Hindus are going to fight for 300 years. Well, they take advantage of this fight because religiously they're tolerant. In 1000, they lose the Turkish warlords to Delhi sultanates that form. So Delhi is in India. These sultans are like chiefs. So if the Mongols are going to go into Delhi, they're going to have to stop these sultanates. They're going to rule for 300 years until Timur the Lame. That's not his real name. It's not like when he was born, his mama said, "Oh, dear sweet little baby, the lame." What does lame mean? Not like in pop culture terms. What does the word lame mean? If you see Mr. Bellamy walking down the hallway kind of limping, how would you describe Mr. Bellamy to people that don't know him? It's okay, don't make me mad.
Crippled or lame?
Lame. Because I've got a gimpiness to me. It's nothing that I'm not aware of, so it's okay that you can acknowledge it. Nerve damage from a broken neck will do that to you. Timur the Lame got in a battle when he was a young man. By the way, he was not directly related to Genghis Khan, but he claimed to be. Why would you do that?
Gain power.
Yeah, if people find out that you're the son or the cousin or a relative of Genghis Khan, automatically people are going to suck up to you. If I told you, hey, George Washington is my great-great-great-great-grandfather, all of a sudden that would be pretty cool because we all know and love George Washington. But we know that's not the case because George Washington never had any children. He had stepchildren, but he didn't have any children. So Timur the Lame takes over and devastates these Delhi sultanates. By the way, Timur, this is kind of cool. And we think about this when we name our children. We try to give our kids cool sounding names. Timur in Mongolian is iron. So this guy's like tough as metal. That's a cool name. He was lame. He had a limp because he sustained a wound to his right leg in battle. He took an arrow to the leg, an arrow to the arm, and he lost 2 fingers. So if that were my story, you guys know my story. I broke my neck and slipping on ice. But if I had a story that I'd been in battle and I was shot in the neck and it severed part of my spine, therefore I have a limp and I'm missing 2 fingers because I got shot by the enemy, all of a sudden in your eyes I would be cool instead of just some dork that slipped on ice. So maybe I need to start changing my story. And I have to think about that a little bit. Anyway, it is believed that Timur the Lame himself, as he conquers most of the Indian subcontinent, was responsible for over 17 million deaths. All of these deaths are before gunpowder. So when we look at wars like World War I or World War II, and we're talking about potentially millions that died, think about the weapons that were used to kill those millions. Gunpowder, bombs, explosives, nuclear. They had none of that. They had arrows and fists. So to kill 17, and swords. After battles, Timur would have people's heads cut off and stacked into pyramids. Fear frightening any future potential enemies was very useful. So if we move on down the road, we've got this guy. His name is Chagate Takate. I don't know how to say any of these words. It doesn't really matter to me. He was a relative of Genghis Khan. As a teenager, he was a mercenary. A mercenary. Oh, this is Timur the Lame. Sorry. A mercenary means someone who's paid to fight wars. It's where he's shot in the leg and loses 2 fingers, but it didn't stop him from becoming a tough guy. In fact, this guy carries around a pimp stick, which I guess that looks pretty cool too. So I wanted to know, just like with Genghis Khan, it mentioned that he died, but there's never the story of how these guys died. So I Googled it for Timur, and I thought, usually I just write it down, but I thought, this is actually a pretty good story, so I wanted to pull it up. He died at 8 o'clock in the evening with icy winds howling around him. The Chinese expedition, so he was in China, was abandoned and the body taken back to his headquarters to be interned in a dome of the Gur Amir Mausoleum in a steel coffin under a slab of black jade 6 feet long, the largest piece of stone in the world. The inscription reads, "This is the resting place of the illustrious and merciful monarch. Someone who's responsible for the death of 17 million people and chops the heads off his enemies, and we're going to call him a merciful monarch?" What does the word mercy usually mean? Yeah. I might defeat you, but after I defeat you, if we're going to wrestle and I defeat you, I pick you up off the mat, I shake your hand, I pat you on the back, and I send you on the way. That's mercy. I'm not going to take out a sword and chop off your head because I've defeated you in sport. That's not merciful. In Europe, Timur the Lame became Tamerlane. So when you hear it, it's the same guy. But all of this stuff here is just crazy interesting stuff. But these guys were so flippin' powerful that they could be responsible for the death of millions of men and not feel any pain as a result of it. So, not related directly to Genghis Khan, but leads all the way up through halfway through the 14th century. Again, taking over as a young man. This is the next guy in charge. His name is Babur, king of a small land in Central Asia at the age of 11. So these guys often took over when they were young because their dad died. We're not talking about presidential elections. Anybody know in America what is the youngest age that you can be the president of the United States? It's in our Constitution, so we could change it. We could change the Constitution to allow an 11-year-old to be elected. Why don't we? Would you vote for an 11-year-old? What's wrong with an 11-year-old? There's a lot of nice ones. Is it safe to say they just don't know much? They might be really good at 11-year-old math, but they don't know much. The youngest that a man or woman can be in the United States today and be elected president is 35 years old. Even 35. Show me your hands if you think 35 is old enough to be the president of the most powerful country on the planet. Is there anybody that thinks 35 has enough experience in the world? Nobody's raising their hands for those of you that are listening to this or watching this on the YouTube. So what's the magical age?
Probably 50.
50? Thank you, I'm 49, so maybe I'm ready. I don't want that job. Too much stress, right? Plus people would compare me to Joe Biden or Donald Trump, and I don't want either of those comparisons. 50, they've lived a while, they've got some experience, they probably understand some things, they've been to school. 11, 9, there's even a guy 6 that's coming up in our notes a little while later, becoming the leader. They don't have any power or authority. Nobody's going to listen to them. When a 6-year-old says, "Mom, I want to," Mom's going to listen for about 12 seconds and say, "Never mind, we're not going to do that." Because if we let 6-year-olds pick, we're going to go to the zoo every day. Which doesn't sound all that bad. But 11. He's dethroned and driven into India. So dethroned means he's kicked out. When you're kicked out, you're angry. I don't want to be kicked out. So his army conquers much of northern India, forming the Mughal Empire in India. His son loses most of the territory that Babur conquered. Babur's grandson succeeds them. So it's a family tradition. That's how these men come to power. It's pretty rare in American history to see that much political power passed down from father to son. You know, in my lifetime, George H.W. Bush was president, and then 2 presidents later, his son George W. Bush was president. That's pretty rare, because those men and or women, potentially eventually, are very powerful people. And to get elected, you have to be liked by a lot of people. We see a lot of division in our world today when it comes to politics and elections, and that division is understandable to a certain extent, yet it's a lot different than here. Because what do you think Babur does to his opponents if they're divided from him, if they're against him? Kills them. So no matter how bad our system looks today, I'm fairly certain that you're not going to see, win or lose, Donald Trump telling the United States Army to go kill all the people that voted for Kamala Harris. Or Kamala Harris telling the United States Army, if she wins the election, to go kill all of Donald Trump's people. There's divisiveness, but it's not death as a penalty. Babur dies at 47 years old. Which actually is an old man, because the average life expectancy in India at that time was 35 to 40. So we're talking about a time in history that 47 is an old man. I'm 49. Some of you look at me like I'm an old man, but you know I'm not that old. I can still do a lot of stuff. So he was quite old for his time. Now, he's followed up by another leader. By the way, check this statistic out. At one point, he leads an army of 12,000 men against an army of 100,000 to victory. You're outnumbered almost 10 to 1, and you win? That's crazy. Must be training, it must be tactics, because it certainly wasn't weapons. All anybody has is horses and arrows. No gunpowder yet. Akbar, which means the greatest one. He rules the Mughal Empire in India from 1556 to 1605. He now has cannon. So we have gunpowder. And his philosophy is, you join me or I kill you. Sort of like Ghengis Khan, sort of like Timur the Lame, sort of like Babur. That's how you get rid of potential enemies. If you do it my way, we're going to get along just fine. If you choose to do it some other way, we're going to have some issues. He also believed that a king must always be the aggressor, so his neighbors won't conquer him. So if you challenge me, I'm going to make an example of you. If you have your phone in your pocket and it goes off right now, I'm going to make a big example of sending you to Mr. Gotchow and taking care of it, so that tomorrow, because I'm fairly certain some of you have your phones because there are none in my caddy right now. Those of you that are guilty know who I'm talking to. That tomorrow you won't challenge me. Or Mrs. Macklin being my neighbor geographically. At some point one day we are going to go out there and conquer her. You guys are jerks. You all looked at me like, no, she's nice. If you're not for me, you're against me. So we will conquer Mrs. Macklin. And then anybody else that decides to challenge us better think twice about that. So anybody could serve in his government. You didn't have to be family. It's almost a democratic style. They have a tax plan that allows people to pay a more fair tax. Akbar gives land to his officials and then reclaims it when they die. He unifies a land of almost 100 million people. So again, if we're comparing the power of these guys, he doesn't own a cell phone. There are no telephones. There are no televisions. To control a land of 100 million people, even today, the state of California only has a population of about 35 million. So this guy, Akbar must have been pretty flippin' powerful to be able to control a land that big, a land that strong. So when we talk about these Mughal leaders, it is crazy to think about how powerful they are. We're going to do one or two more slides, and then we'll cut it off for today because I really would like you to do your periodization of your timeline or your history, at least get part of it done in class. But besides just kicking the crap out of all of his opponents, he also brings culture with him. Art, education, politics, language, all of those things are deemed as important, not just power and control over my opponents and my enemies. Hindu and Urdu become the official languages of Pakistan. Think about how critical language is to us today. Though we try to find ways to, I don't know what the right word is, not tolerate, but combine languages in America. I mean, you all know some people at least that primarily speak Spanish. And we have a language barrier with them. I don't understand Spanish. There's like 4 words that I get. So that creates issues for us. So creating a consolidated language would make things easier. In America, we don't have a national language. You don't have to speak English to be in America. In some countries, the language is a requirement. So we're open to other languages, but if you come to America only speaking Spanish, just think about the disadvantage that those people are in. Not able to communicate easily with me, who has no skills in speaking Spanish or Chinese or Japanese. New architecture styles, so no longer are we just living in mud huts. We're starting to build buildings that really look cool. So history really starts to shift during Akbar's golden age of time. That's why it's called the golden age. Everything starts to change and look better. It's not just about survival. It's about survival with coolness as an emphasis. And I think that's probably a good place for us to stop today. We'll pick up with Akbar's successor. Look at without moving into any details, Akbar's successor is a woman. So when we look at history, we typically think that women are sort of powerless. Not always, not everywhere. You know, we're still waiting to elect the first female president in the United States today. It'll happen in your lifetime, whether it's this year or whether it's 15, 20 years from now. We will have a female president, and it won't hurt us any. But the Mughal Empire was far, far ahead of us several hundred years ago, electing a woman, and she was tough. Okay, I want to shut down there for today, at least notes-wise. You have 2 things, reminder for you that you need to do for me. Go into your study guide, and there's, 3 or 4 vocab maybe, and 2 or 3 short answer questions. Just the red ones. Just do those in your study guide. If there are terms in the vocab that you don't know that aren't in your notes, what can you do? Yeah, Google them. Just make sure that they fit, the answers fit within the stuff that we're talking about. Does that make sense? Okay, so I want you to do the red on the study guide, and I want you to see how much, at least get a good start on your periodization of your life. It starts out with a list of 15 events that you remember in your lifetime.
I can't get to the study guide.
Why not?
It's just not there.
Okay, I'll put it there. Is anybody in it? Some are, some aren't. Okay, let me hit stop so that I can work on this stuff.
Never mind, the spelling is there. I had to refresh.